The radar operator doesn't blink. He stares at the screen. A new contact has just appeared 12 nautical miles southeast of the carrier group. It wasn't there 4 seconds ago. He reaches for his headset and speaks one sentence. Within 90 seconds, that sentence will change the posture of every ship, every aircraft, and every sailor in the strike group. But right now, in this moment, the Persian Gulf is perfectly still, and that silence is about to become a problem. 6 hours earlier, the morning had started the way every morning starts aboard a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier operating in the Strait of Hormuz. Controlled, predictable, methodical. Flight operations had begun before dawn. FA-18. Super Hornets launched from the bow catapults in pairs, their afterburners cutting orange lines across the dark water before banking east into patrol routes they had flown 100 times before. Below deck, maintenance crews cycled through, pre-checks on the next wave of aircraft. In the Combat Information Center, known simply as CIC, watch teams monitored surface contacts, air traffic, and subsurface activity across a 200-mile radius. Everything was cataloged. Everything was tracked. Everything was normal. The carrier was not alone. Surrounding it in a carefully designed formation were the escorts. A guided missile cruiser positioned 5 miles to the north. 2 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers staggered on the flanks, and a fast combat support ship trailing several miles to the rear. Beneath the surface, somewhere no one on the bridge would confirm, a Los Angeles-class submarine maintained a silent watch. This was a carrier strike group in full operational posture. Not at war, but not relaxed either. The Strait of Hormuz doesn't allow relaxation. It is one of the most surveilled, contested, and strategically volatile waterways on Earth. Every transit through it is planned weeks in advance. Every ship in the group knows exactly what to do if something goes wrong. On this particular morning, nothing had gone wrong yet. The air was heavy, humid, carrying the faint smell of jet fuel and salt. Visibility was good. Winds were light. The sea was calm enough that the carrier barely rocked. Sailors moved through passageways with the quiet efficiency of people who have done this so many times it has become muscle memory. On the bridge, the officer of the deck scanned the horizon with binoculars. Commercial shipping traffic dotted the lane to the north. Tankers, container ships, dhows, all of it expected, all of it identified. The morning watch was halfway done, and the only notable event had been a routine position report from a P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft operating 40 miles to the east. But then something changed. At 0917 local time, a surface search radar operator on the cruiser detected a small, slow-moving contact bearing 140 at 11 nautical miles. It appeared briefly, then faded. He adjusted the gain on his scope and waited. 8 seconds later, the contact returned. It was moving at roughly 70 knots, low altitude, very low, no transponder, no identification, friend or foe signal. No flight plan filed with any regional authority. He flagged it as an unknown and reported it to the tactical action officer. The response was routine: classify it, track it. If it holds course and speed, determine closest point of approach. At this point, no one was alarmed. Small radar contacts in the Gulf are common. Birds, fishing boats throwing off radar returns, atmospheric anomalies, even commercial drones operated by oil companies occasionally show up unannounced. The contact was logged. The watch continued. What happened next wasn't expected. 2 minutes later, a second contact appeared. Same bearing, same altitude profile, same speed. It materialized 600 meters behind the first, slightly offset to the east. The radar operator leaned forward in his chair. He keyed his mic and reported again. 2 unknowns, low and slow, bearing 140, now 10 nautical miles. Holding formation. The word formation changed the room. A single contact is a curiosity. 2 contacts flying in coordinated spacing is something else entirely. The tactical action officer stepped closer to the screen. He asked for confirmation from the carrier's own SPY-1 radar. Within seconds, the carrier's Combat Information Center confirmed the same 2 contacts, and then added a third. It had just appeared to the south of the pair, tracking at the same speed, same altitude, same profile. 3 unknowns. Formation flight, no identification, inbound. And that's when things became dangerous. The cruiser's commanding officer was notified. The carrier's air warfare commander was pulled from a briefing. Within 4 minutes, the strike group's tactical network had shared the data across every ship. What they were looking at was now undeniable. These were not birds. These were not radar ghosts. These were unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, and they were flying directly toward the carrier strike group in a pattern that suggested coordination, pre-programming, and intent. The watch floor shifted from routine to heightened, not panic, procedure. By 09:23, the count had risen to 5. 5 drones, all moving in a loose but deliberate wedge formation. They were descending slightly, dropping from around 1,000 feet to approximately 500. Their speed held constant at 70 knots. Their heading never wavered. Every single one of them was pointed at the carrier. The air warfare commander studied the geometry on the large-screen tactical display. He had seen this profile before, in intelligence briefs, in after-action reports from other theaters. This was a swarm, not a sophisticated one, not autonomous, but coordinated enough to saturate defenses if left unchecked. The drones were most likely Iranian-made Babel or Shahed series platforms, small, cheap, difficult to detect at range. Individually, they posed a manageable threat. Together, in a coordinated formation aimed at a single high-value target, they became something far more serious. The mathematics of the situation were simple and unforgiving. At 70 knots, the drones were closing at roughly 1 nautical mile every 50 seconds. They were now 8 miles out. That gave the strike group approximately 6.5 minutes before the closest drone would reach weapons release range, if it was armed. And that was the question no one could yet answer. Were these surveillance platforms sent to provoke and collect intelligence, or were they carrying warheads? The answer didn't matter as much as the procedure did. The standing rules of engagement in the 5th Fleet area of operations were clear. Any inbound aircraft or unmanned vehicle demonstrating hostile intent, defined as a direct course toward a U.S. warship, refusal to respond to warnings, and absence of identification, could be engaged. These drones checked every box, but the response that followed was not reactive. It was layered. The first layer was electronic. The cruiser's AN/SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite began scanning the drone's control frequencies. If these platforms were remotely piloted, there would be a data link, a signal connecting them to an operator on a ship, a shore station, or possibly an aircraft. Within seconds, the electronic warfare team identified 2 distinct command frequencies, transmitting from a point on the Iranian coastline, 37 nautical miles to the northeast. The signals were consistent with known Iranian drone control architectures. The tactical action officer now had a picture. He knew what was coming, where it was coming from, and who was sending it. The second layer was defensive. The carrier launched an EA-18G Growler from the Alert 5 position on the flight deck. The Growler, an electronic attack aircraft, was airborne in under 90 seconds. Its mission was not to shoot, it was to jam. As it climbed to altitude and banked toward the inbound formation, its ALQ-99 jamming pods began flooding the electromagnetic spectrum across the drone's control bands. The effect was immediate. 2 of the 5 drones wobbled. One began, a slow, uncommanded turn to the left. Its link to the operator had been severed. It was now flying on nothing but its last programmed instruction, which appeared to be a simple heading hold. It drifted east, away from the strike group, losing altitude as it went. But the remaining drones did not falter. And that told the air warfare commander something critical. They were not all dependent on real-time control. Some were operating on pre-programmed GPS waypoints. They didn't need an operator. They just needed a target. And then the count changed again. 3 more contacts appeared, bearing 135, 6 miles out, low and fast. The swarm had grown to 8. The third layer activated. The cruiser's Phalanx CIWS, a close-in weapon system capable of firing 4,500 rounds per minute, was set to auto-engage mode. The destroyer on the eastern flank powered up its own CIWS and slewed its 5-inch gun toward the inbound bearing. On the carrier, the ship's self-defense team armed the rolling airframe missile launchers and the Sea Sparrow system. Every defensive weapon in the strike group was now pointed southeast. The Growler pilot, callsign Venom 6-1, reported from altitude. He had visual on the formation. 8 small Delta Wing platforms. No visible munitions under the wings, but he couldn't confirm. At this range, he requested permission to engage with an AIM-9X Sidewinder. The Air Warfare Commander held. Not yet. Not until the drones crossed a defined threshold. That threshold was 4 nautical miles. At 0929, the lead drone crossed it. The order came as a single word. Engage. Venom 6-1 rolled in from 12,000 feet, selected heat-seeking mode, and fired. The Sidewinder dropped from the wing rail, ignited, and tracked the lead drone's small but detectable infrared signature. The missile covered the distance in just over 3 seconds. The drone disintegrated in a brief flash of composite material and burning fuel. No explosion. Just a sudden absence where a target had been. The Phalanx on the cruiser opened fire 6 seconds later. The sound was unmistakable. A deep, mechanical buzz that vibrated through the hull, felt more than heard. A stream of 20mm tungsten rounds reached out toward the second drone at nearly 3,000 feet per second. The drone came apart in midair, scattering debris across the water in a wide arc. A third drone was struck by a rolling airframe missile launched from the carrier's starboard side. The ram tracked the target with passive radar homing, adjusting its flight path twice before impact. The drone folded in half and tumbled into the sea, trailing a thin line of smoke that dissolved in the wind before it reached the surface. Within 40 seconds, 3 drones had been destroyed, but 5 remained, and they were now inside 3 nautical miles. The Growler fired a second Sidewinder. It hit a 4th drone at 2.6 miles. The destroyer's 5-inch gun engaged the 5th with proximity-fused rounds, detonating a shell close enough to shred its wing. The drone spiraled downward and struck the water at an angle, skipping once before sinking. The 6th drone, still drifting from the earlier jamming, had descended to 60 feet above the sea and was losing speed. It crashed into the Gulf on its own, 1.5 miles from the cruiser, swallowed by the water without ceremony. 2 drones remained. They were now at 1.8 nautical miles and still closing. The Phalanx on the carrier engaged. The first burst missed. The system recalculated. The second burst found its target. The drone shattered at 1.2 miles. The final drone, the 8th, crossed inside 1 mile before a second ram intercepted it. The missile struck. From above, driving the drone into the sea with enough force to send a plume of salt water 40 feet into the air. And then the radar was clear. No one spoke for several seconds. The CIC was silent except for the hum of cooling fans and the low murmur of data links updating. 8 contacts had appeared. 8 contacts were gone. The entire engagement, from first detection to last kill, had lasted 11 minutes and 42 seconds. Not one drone had reached the carrier. Not one had deployed a weapon. Not one had achieved its objective. But the strike group did not relax. The electronic warfare team continued monitoring the control frequencies from the Iranian coast. They noted something important. The transmissions had stopped, not gradually, abruptly. Whoever had been sending those signals had gone dark the moment the last drone was destroyed. They had been watching. They knew exactly what had happened, and they chose silence. The carrier's commanding officer ordered the strike group to increase speed and shift formation to a tighter defensive posture. Air patrols were doubled. The submarine, still somewhere beneath the surface, was tasked with monitoring subsurface activity along the projected line of the drone launch origin. A formal report was transmitted to 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain. The language was precise, clinical, and completely devoid of emotion. No additional drones were detected for the remainder of the transit. The Strait of Hormuz passed beneath the carrier group without further incident. The sun moved across a white sky. The sea remained calm. Sailors returned to their routines: maintenance, watch rotations, meals in silence. On the bridge, the officer of the deck lowered his binoculars and noted the time in the log. Nothing exploded that day. No ship was damaged. No sailor was injured. There were no headlines that matched the scale of what had actually occurred. But somewhere, in a classified briefing room, the data from those 11 minutes was being studied frame by frame, signal by signal, second by second. Because what happened that morning wasn't just a skirmish, it was a test. And every test reveals something about the one being tested and about the one doing the testing. The strike group had answered. Quietly, completely, and without a single wasted motion. The Gulf returned to its silence. But the silence meant something different now.